Looks like it. Hello everyone and welcome back to Muse Reads the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion. The Cinnamon Jar. Alright, just doing the usual setup and waiting for folks and we'll get started. Wrong button. See here. Hopefully everyone's doing well today. I'm alright. There we go. Put that there. Put this here. There we go. I think that's everything I need right now. Hey Phil. Hey Jeff. Alright, we'll leave that for that. Think that's everything. Okay, well YouTube's frozen, so that's good. Who needs YouTube? Anyway. Hello and welcome back to Muse Reads Tolkien, the Silmarillion. Hello. You gonna join us? No, don't get out of camera. Stay up there. Stay where everybody can see you, Bob. Can you say hi? Can you say hi? No, you're trying to go for my pasta. You want my food. No. No food for Bob. Not my food. We're reading today the Tale of Hurin, which is the longest story in this book. We're probably going to split it in half because it's really long. I should actually make sure what page that would be halfway through. It's based on the I believe is it Swedish. I don't remember if it's Sweden or not, but the story of Kalervo, which is another great myth that he greatly enjoyed, and he wanted to write his own version of it. The dog hears me talking and is upset. All right, so let's see. Call that 29. Pages, so we need to quit like it's 16 pages. Okay, 214. It starts right after the big war we read about last week. At the end of the war, there actually is a description of how Morgoth captures Turin's dad, Hurin, and has trapped him on top of a mountain and basically glued him down to a stone chair and said, "Here, watch as everything sucks." And so his fate is to watch as everything sucks. And the next tale is going to be about his son and how his life sucks. It's got lots of, sad, shitty things in it. But, it's fun. I don't feel the same way about it as I do Beren and Luthien, because it is just kind of incredibly fucked up and sad, but, you know, sometimes that's how it's gotta be in this kind of thing. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started with chapter 21 of Hurin to Rambar. And let me pull this over, make sure this is... minimize that. Nope, do not play my audio. Just want to have that. There we go. Okay. Of Hurin to Rambar. Rianne, daughter of Belagund, was the wife of Huor, son of Galdor. And she was wedded to him 2 months before he went with Hurin and his brother to the Nerniath Arnonidad, the fancy word for the war. When no tidings came of her lord, she fled into the wild, but she was aided by the Grey Elves of Mithrim, and when her son Tuor was born, they fostered him. Then Rianne departed from Hithlum, and going to the Howden Nengin, laid herself down upon it, and died. Lots of moms just wandering into the wilderness and dying because their husbands are dead. It's kind of silly, but Tuor will get his own little story. I don't think in this book. I think it's in the Unfinished Tales, but... So in other words, I think he is a cousin of Hurin, maybe? Anyway, he doesn't matter. Morwen, daughter of Beregund, was the wife of Hurin, lord of Dorlomen, and their son was Turin, who was born in the year that Baron Ecaminian, I can't say words today, came upon Luthien in the forest of Neldoreth. A daughter they had, who was also called Lelath, which is laughter, and she was beloved by Turin, her brother. But when she was 3 years old, there came a pestilence to Hithlum, born on an evil wind out of Angband, and she died. Hello, Alexis. Hello, Daniel. Yes, the puppy's very angry. I'm going to tell my mother she needs to lock up the dog because she can hear me, I think, and she's sad. She says, Mom, please, I want to go upstairs. Let's see, where were we? Alright, we'll stick right there. She's probably on the phone with the baby. The 12-year-old. Now, after the Nerneath Arnodiad, Morwen abode still in Dorlomen, for Turin was but 8 years old, and she was again with child. Those days were evil, for the Easterlings that came into Hithlum despised the remnant of the people of Hador, and they oppressed them, and took their lands and their goods, and enslaved their children. But so great was the beauty and majesty of the Lady of Dorlomen that the Easterlings were afraid, and dared not to lay hands upon her or her household. And they whispered among themselves, saying she was perilous, and a witch skilled in magic and in league with the elves. Yet she was now poor and without aid, save that she was succored secretly by a kinswoman of Hurin named Erin, whom Broda, an Easterling, had taken as a wife. And Morwen feared greatly that Turin would be taken from her and enslaved. Therefore it came into her heart to send him away in secret, and to beg King Thengol to harbor him, for Beren, son of Berahir, was her father's kinsman, and he had moreover been a friend of Hurin ere evil fell. Therefore, in the autumn of the year of lamentation, Morwen sent Turin forth over the mountains with 2 aged servants, bidding them find entry, if they could, into the kingdom of Doriath. Thus was the fate of Turin woven, which is foretold in that lay that is called Narn Hin Hurin, the tale of the children of Hurin, and is the longest of all the lays that speak of those days. Here that tale is told in brief, for it is woven with the fate of the Silmarils and of the elves, and it is called the Tale of Grief, for it is sorrowful, and in it are revealed most evil works of Morgoth Bauglair. So the Tale of the Children of Hurin is one of those works that Christopher Tolkien, his son, later goes on to turn into a full novel that we'll read at some point. In the first beginning of the year, Morwen gave birth to her child, the daughter of Hurin, and she named her Nenyor, which is mourning. But Turin and his companions, passing through great perils, came at last to the borders of Doriath, and there they were found by Beleg Strongbow, chief of the march wardens of King Thingol, who led them to Menegroth. Then Thingol received Turin and took him even into his own fostering, in honor of Hurin the Steadfast. For Thingol's mood was changed toward the houses of the elf friends. Thereafter messengers went north to Hithlum, bidding Morwen leave Dorlomen and return with them to Doriath. But still she would not leave the house in which she had dwelt with Hurin. And when the elves departed, she sent with them the dragon helm of Dorlomen, greatest of the heirlooms of the house of Hador. Turin grew great and fair and strong in Doriath, but he was marked with sorrow. For 9 years he dwelt in Thingol's halls, and during that time his grief grew less, for messengers went at times to Hithlum, and returning they brought better tidings of Morwen and Nenyor. But there came a day when the messengers did not return out of the north, and Thingol would send no more. Then Turin was filled with fear for his mother and his sister, and in grimness of heart he went before the king and asked for mail and sword. And he put on the dragon helm of Dorlomen, and went out to battle on the marches of Doriath, and became the companion-in-arms of Beleg Quethalion. And when 3 years had passed, Turin returned again to Menegroth, but he came from the wild and was unkempt, and his gear and garments were wayworn. Now one there was in Doriath of the people of the Nandor, high in the councils of the king. Seiros was his name. He had long begrudged to Turin the honor he received as Thingol's foster son, and seated opposite to him at the board, he taunted him, saying, "If the men of Hithlum are so wild and fell, of what sort are the women of that land? Do they run like deer, clad only in their hair?" Then Turin, in great anger, took up a drinking vessel and cast it at Saros, and he was grievously hurt. On the next day, Saros waylaid Turin as he set out from Menegroth to return to the marches. But Turin overcame him and sent him to run naked as a hunted beast through the woods. Then Saros, fleeing in terror before him, fell into the chasm of a stream, and his body was broken on a great rock in the water. But others coming saw what was done, and Mablung was among them, and he bade Turin return with him to Menegroth, and abide the judgment of the king, seeking his pardon. But Turin, deeming himself now an outlaw, and fearing to be held captive, refused Mablung's bidding, and turned swiftly away, and passing through the girdle of Melian, he came into the woods west of Sirion. There he joined himself to a band of such houseless and desperate men as could be found in those evil days, lurking in the wild. And their hands were turned against all who came in their path, elves and men and orcs. Don't you love when you insult someone's mother and then they strip you and chase you like a beast naked through the woods and you fall into a ravine and die? It's like one of the most wild, out of left field deaths. Like, first, we're just having a nice conversation, and then the next day, he's chasing him naked through the woods. Oh, man. Sometimes you gotta go hardcore, I guess. But when all that had befallen was told and searched out before Thingol, the king pardoned Turin, holding him wronged. Okay, the guy insulted his mom, but do you gotta chase him naked through the woods? I feel like community service, at least. In that time, Beleg Strongbow returned from the North Marches and came to Menegroth seeking him, and Thingol spoke to Beleg, saying, I grieve, Cuthalion, for I took Hurin's son as my son, and so he shall remain, unless Hurin himself should return out of the shadows to claim his own. I would not have any say that Turin was driven forth unjustly into the wild, and gladly would I welcome him back, for I loved him well. And Beleg answered, I will seek Turin until I find him, and I will bring him back to Menegroth if I can, for I love him also. Another one of those big homoerotic relationships in this story. Then Beleg departed from Menegroth, and far across Beleriand he sought in vain for tidings of Turin through many perils. But Turin abode long among the outlaws, and became their captain, and he named himself Nethian the Wronged. Very warily they dwelt in the wooded lands south of Teglin, but when a year had passed since Turin fled from Doriath, Beleg came upon their camp by night. It was chanced that at the time Turin was gone from the camp, and the outlaws seized Beleg and bound him, and treated him cruelly. For they feared him as a spy of the king of Doriath. But Turin, returning and seeing what was done, was stricken with remorse for all their evil and lawless deeds. And he released Beleg, and they renewed their friendship. And Turin forswore henceforward war or plunder against all, save the servants of Angband. So, he chases a guy that insulted his mom off a cliff. He gets upset about the fact that he's probably going to get punished for it, so he runs away, and joins a band of actual outlaws and murders and pillages, until his best friend shows up and he goes, you're right, I should stop committing crimes and running away from the crime I committed to commit more crimes. This guy's wild. Then Beleg told Turin of King Thingol's pardon, and he sought to persuade him by all means that he might return with him to Doriath, saying that there was great need of his strength and valor on the north marches of the realm. Of late, the orcs have found a way down out of Tower Nifuin, he said. They have made a road through the pass of Anak. I do not remember it, said Turin. Never did we go so far from the borders, said Beleg, but you have seen the peaks of the Kissagrim far off, and to the east the dark walls of the Gorgoroth. Anak lies between, above the high springs of Mindeb, a hard and dangerous road. Yet many come by it now, and Dimbar, which used to be in peace, is falling under the Black Hand, and the men of Brethel are troubled. We are needed there. But in the pride of his heart, Turin refused the pardon of the king, and in the words of Beleg were no avail to change his mood. And he, for his part, urged Beleg to remain with him in the lands west of Sirion. But that Beleg would not do, and he said, Hard you are, Turin, and stubborn. Now the turn is mine. If you wish indeed to have the strongbow beside you, look for me in Dimbar, for thither I shall return. On the next day, Beleg set out, and Turin went with him, a bowshot from the camp, but he said nothing. Is it farewell then, son of Hurin, said Beleg. Then Turin looked westward, and he saw far off the great height of Amon-Rû, and of what lay before him he answered, You have said, seek me in Dimbar. But I say, seek for me on Amon-Rû, which is actually, I think... Oh, damn, I cut out the mountain. Above that river is a mountain. That's Amon-Rû. Else this is our last farewell. Then they parted in friendship, yet in sadness. Let's evaluate. Chased a man naked through the woods and accidentally killed him for insulting your mother. Ran off to become an actual criminal and murder and pillage. Got pardoned for both by the king, and your best friend comes and says, hey, let's go fight in a place that actually needs fighting. And you say, no, I'm too proud. I want to be alone in the woods on a mountain. Without anyone, I don't need them. That's the story thus far. In Tolkien's defense, he is basing this on an ancient myth called Kalervo, which is also wild. Now Beleg returned to the Thousand Caves, and coming before Thingol and Melian, he told them of all that had befallen, save only of his evil handling by Turin's companions. Then Thingol sighed and said, What more would Turin have me do? Give me leave, lord, said Beleg, and I will guard him and guide him as I may. Then no man shall say that elven words are lightly spoken, nor would I wish to see so great a good run to nothing in the wild. Then Thingol gave Beleg leave to do as he would, and he said, Beleg Cuthalion, for many deeds you have earned my thanks, but not the least is the finding of my foster son. At this parting ask for any gift, and I will not deny it to you. I ask then for a sword of worth, said Beleg, for the orcs come now too thick and close for a bow only, and such blade as I have is no match for their armor. Choose from all that I have, said Thingol, save only Aranruth my own. Then Beleg chose Anglachel, and that was a sword of great worth, and it was so named because it was made of iron that fell from heaven as a blazing star. It would cleave all earth-delved iron. One other sword only in Middle-earth was like to it. That sword does not enter into this tale, though it was made of the same ore by the same smith, and that smith was Eol the Dark Elf, who took a Redhel Turgon's sister to wife. He gave Anglachel to Thingol as fee, which he begrudged, for leave to dwell in Nan Elmoth, but its mate, Anguirel, he kept, until it was stolen from him by Maeglin, his son. Just some cool sword stories, you know. Hey, Katsuki? Oh, Phil, never change. But as Thingol turned the hilt of Anglachel towards Beleg, Melian looked at the blade, and she said, There is malice in this sword. The dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. It will not love the hand it serves, neither will it abide with you long. None the less, I will wield it while I may, said Beleg. Another gift I will give you, Cuthalion, said Melian, that shall be your help in the wild, and the help of those whom you choose. And she gave him store of lembas, the waybread of the elves, wrapped in leaves of silver, and the threads that bound it were sealed at the knots with the seal of the queen, a wafer of white wax shaped as a single flower of Telperion. For according to the customs of the Eldilei, the keeping and giving of lembas belonged to the queen alone. Oh, that's fun. Galadriel in the movies gave them lembas, so only queens can give bread. In nothing did Melian show greater favor to Turin than in this gift, for the Eldar had never before allowed men to use this waybread, and seldom did so again. Then Beleg departed with these gifts from Menegroth and went back to the North Marches, where he had his lodges and many friends. Then in Dimbar the orcs were driven back, and Anglachel rejoiced to be unsheathed. But when the winter came and war was stilled, suddenly his companions missed Beleg, and he returned to them no more. Now when Beleg parted from the outlaws and returned into Dariath, Turin led them away westward out of Sirian's Vale, for they grew weary of their life without rest. So wait. This man swore back there he wasn't going to do no more lawless deeds. But now he's back with them? That lasted. It chanced at a time of evening that they came upon 3 dwarves, who fled before them. There we go. But one that lagged behind was seized and thrown down, and a man of the company took his bow and let an arrow fly at the others as they vanished into the dusk. That was murder. You did a murder again. Turin? He pleaded for his life before Turin and offered his ransom to lead them to the hidden halls which none might find without his aid. Then Turin pitied Mim and spared him, and he said, "Where is your house?" Then Mim answered, "High above the lands lies the house of Mim upon the great hill. Amon-Rû is that hill now called, though since the elves changed all the names." I like that line. The elves changed all the names. Then Turin was silent, and he looked upon the dwarf, and at last he said, "You shall bring us to that place." On the next day they set out thither, following Mim to Amon-Rû. Now the hill stood upon the edge of the moorlands that rose between the vales of Sirion and Nairog, and high above the stony heath it reared its crown, but its steep grey head was bare, save for the red saragon that mantled the stone. And as the men of Turin's band grew near, the sun westering broke through the clouds and fell upon the crown, and the saragon was all in flower. Then one of them said, "There is blood on the hilltop." But Mim led them by secret paths up the steep slopes of Amon-Rû, and at the mouth of his cave he bowed to Turin, saying, "Enter into Baren Dadwen, the house of ransom, for it shall be called." And now there came another dwarf bearing light to greet him, and they spoke together, and passed swiftly down into the darkness of the cave. But Turin followed after, and came at length to a chamber far within, lit by dim lamps hanging upon chains. There he found Mim kneeling at a stone couch beside the wall, and he tore his beard and wailed, crying one name unceasingly, and on the couch there lay a third. But Turin entering stood beside Mim and offered him aid. Then Mim looked up at him and said, "You can give no aid, for this is Kim, my son, and he is dead, pierced by an arrow. He died at sunset. Ibun, my son, has told me." Yeah, those arrows you shot. For no reason. Good job! Then pity rose in Turin's heart, and he said to Mim, "Alas, I would recall that shaft if I would. Now Baren Dandwith this house shall be called in truth, for if I ever come to any wealth, I will pay you a ransom of gold for your son in token of sorrow, though it gladden your heart no more." Then Mim rose and looked long at Turin. "I hear you," he said. "You speak like a dwelf lord of old, and at that I marvel. Now my heart is cooled, though it is not glad, and in this house you may dwell if you will, for I will pay my ransom." You find some dwarves in the woods. You shoot at them, take one ransom. You make him show you the way to his house. You find out you accidentally killed his son. And again, you are holding him ransom. And by apologizing for it, dwarf goes, "Cool, you can live here now." God, this is just wild. So began the abiding of Turin in the hidden house of Mim upon Amon-Rû, and he walked on the greenward before the mouth of the cave, and looked out east and west and north. Northward he looked, and descried the forest of Brethil climbing green about Amon-Obel in its mist, and thither his eyes were drawn ever and again, he knew not why. For his heart was set rather to the northwest, where league upon league away, on the skirts of the sky, it seemed to him he could glimpse the mountains of shadow, the walls of his home. But at evening Turin looked west into the sunset, as the sun rode down red into the hazes above the distant coasts, and the vale of Nairog lay deep in the shadows between. In the time that followed, Turin spoke much with Mim, and sitting with him alone he listened to his lore and the tale of his life. For Mim came of the dwarves that were banished in ancient days from the great dwarf cities of the east, and long before the return of Morgoth they wandered westward into Beleriand, but they became diminished in stature and smithcraft, and they took to lives of stealth, walking with bowed shoulders and furtive steps. Before the dwarves of Nogrod and Belagost came west over the mountains, the elves of Beleriand knew not what these others were, and hunted them, and slew them. But afterwards they let them alone, and they were called Njoigith Niben, the petty dwarves, in the Sindarin tongue. They loved none but themselves, and if they feared and hated the orcs, they hated the Eldar no less, and the exiles most of all. For the Noldor, they said, had stolen their lands and their homes. Long ere King Finrod Felagund came over the sea, the caves of Nargothrond were discovered by them, and by them its delving was begun. And beneath the crown of Amon-Rû, the bald hill, the slow hands of the petty dwarves had bored and deepened the caves through the long years they dwelt there, untroubled by the grey elves of the woods. But now at last they had dwindled and died out of Middle-earth, save all save Mim and his 2 sons. Bad luck about that. There's just one now. Mim was old even in the reckoning of the dwarves, old and forgotten, and in his halls the smithies were idle and the axes rusted, and their name was remembered only in ancient tales of Doriath and Nagathrond. But when the year drew on to midwinter, snow came down from the north heavier than they had known it in the river vales, and Amon-Rû was covered deep, and they said that the winters worsened in Beleriand as the power of Angband grew. Then only the hardiest dared stir abroad, and some fell sick, and all were pinched with hunger. But in the dim dusk of a winter's day there appeared suddenly among them a man, and it seemed of great bulk and girth. As it seemed, of great bulk and girth, cloaked and hooded in white. And he walked up to the fire without a word. And when the man sprang up in fear, he laughed and threw back his hood, and beneath his wide cloak he wore a great pack. And in the light of the fire, Turin looked again on the face of Beleg Cutholion. You don't deserve Beleg, Turin, you really don't. Thus Beleg returned once more to Turin, and their meeting was glad, and with him he brought out of Dimbar the dragon helm of Dorloman, thinking that it might lift Turin's thought again above this life in the wilderness as the leader of a petty company. But still Turin would not return to Doriath, and Beleg, yielding to his love against his wisdom, remained with him and did not depart. And in that time he labored much for the good of Turin's company. Those that were hurt or sick he tended, and he gave to them the Lembas of Melian, and they were quickly healed. For though the Grey Elves were less in skill and knowledge than the exiles of Valinor, in the ways of the life of Middle-earth they had a wisdom beyond the reach of men. And because Beleg was strong and enduring, far-sighted in mind as in eye, he came to be held in honor among the outlaws. But the hatred of Mim for the elf that had come into Bar-en Dandwyth grew ever greater, and he sat with Ibun his son in the deepest shadows of his house, speaking to none. But Turin paid him now little heed, and when winter passed and spring came, they had sterner work to do. Turin doesn't deserve Beleg's bulk and girth. It's true, he doesn't. Who knows now the counsels of Morgoth? Who can measure the reach of his thought? Who had been Melkor, mighty among the Ainur of the great song, and sat now a dark lord upon a dark throne in the north, weighing in his malice all the tidings that came to him, and perceiving more of the deeds and purposes of his enemies than even the wisest of them feared, save only Melian, the queen. To her often the thought of Morgoth reached out, and there was foiled. And now again the might of Angband was moved, and as the long fingers of a groping hand, the forerunners of his army probed the ways into Beleriand. Through Anak they came, and Dimbar was taken, and all the north marches of Doriath. Down the ancient road that they came that led through the long defile of Sirion, past the isle where Minas Tirith of Finrod had stood, and so through the land between Maldoin and Sirion, and on through the eaves of Brethil to the crosses of Teglin. Thence the road went on into the guarded plain, but the orcs did not go far upon it as yet, for there dwelt now in the wild a terror that was hidden, and upon the red hill were watchful eyes of which they had not been warned. For Turin put on again the helm of Hador, and far and wide in Beleriand the whisper went under wood and over stream and through the passes of the hills, saying that the helm and bow that had fallen in Dimbar had arisen again beyond hope. Then many who went leaderless, dispossessed but undaunted, took heart again, and came to seek the 2 captains. Dor Quothal, the land of bow and helm, was in that time named all the region between Teglin and the west march of Doriath. And Turin named himself anew Gorthal the dread helm, and his heart was high again. In Menegroth and in the deep halls of Nargothrond, and even in the hidden realm of Gondolin, the fame of the deeds of the 2 captains was heard, and in Angband they were also known. Then Morgoth laughed, for now by the dragon helm was Hurin's son revealed to him again, and ere long Amon-Rû was ringed with spies. In the waning of the year, Mim the dwarf and Ibun his son went out from Bar-en Dandwyth to gather roots in the wild for their winter store, and they were taken captive by orcs. Then for a second time Mim promised to guide his enemies by the secret paths to his home on Amon-Rû, but yet he sought to delay the fulfillment of his promise, and demanded that Gorthal should not be slain. Then the orc captain laughed, and he said to Mim, "Assuredly Turin son of Hurin shall not be slain." Thus was Bar-en Dandwyth betrayed, for the orcs came upon it by nights unawares, guided by Mim. There many of Turin's company were slain as they slept, but some, fleeing by an inner stair, came out upon the hilltop, and there fought until they fell, and their blood flowed out upon the Saragon that mantled the stone. But a net was cast over Turin as he fought, and he was enmeshed in it, and overcome and led away. And at length, when all was silent again, Mim crept out of the shadow of his house, and as the sun rose over the mists of Sirion, he stood beside the dead men on the hilltop. But he perceived that not all those that lay there were dead, for by one his gaze was returned, and he looked in the eyes of Beleg the elf. Then, with hatred long stored, Mim stepped up to Beleg, and drew forth the sword Anglachel that lay beneath the body of the one that had fallen beside him. But Beleg, stumbling up, seized back the sword and thrust it at the dwarf, and Mim in terror fled wailing from the hilltop. And Beleg cried after him, "The vengeance of the house of Hador will find you yet." I mean, they were outlaws, and they did take over his house, and they did kill his son. You know, I feel like Mim makes sense. Now Beleg was sorely wounded, but he was mighty among the elves of Middle-earth, and he was, moreover, a master of healing. Therefore he did not die, and slowly his strength returned, and he sought in vain among the dead for Turin to bury him. But he found him not, and then he knew that Hurin's son was yet alive and taken to Angband. With little hope, Beleg departed from Amon-Rû and set out northward towards the crossings of Teighlin, following in the tracks of the orcs, and he crossed over the Brithiac and journeyed through Dimbar towards the path of Anak. Let me check something here real quick. Oh, it won't show me, dang. Oh well. And now he was not far behind them, for he went without sleeping, whereas they had tarried on their road, hunting in the lands and fearing no pursuit as they came northward. And not even in the dreadful woods of Tar Nufuin did he swerve from the trail, for the skill of Beleg was greater than any that have been in Middle-earth. But as he passed by night through that evil land, he came upon one sleeping at the foot of a great dead tree, and Beleg, staying his steps beside the sleeper, saw it was an elf. Then he spoke to him and gave him Lembas, and asked him what fate had brought him to that terrible place, and he named himself Gwyndor, son of Gullion. Grieving, Beleg looked upon him, for Gwyndor was now but a bent and fearful shadow of his former shape and mood, and when in the Nerniath Arnodia died, the Lord of Nargothrond rode with rash courage to the very doors of Angband, and there was taken. For few of the Noldor whom Morgoth captured were put to the death, because of their skill in forging and in mining for metals and gems, and Gwyndor was not slain, but put to labor in the mines of the north. By secret tunnels, known only to themselves, the mining elves might sometimes escape. And thus it came to pass that Beleg found him, spent and bewildered in the mazes of Tar Nufuin. And Gwyndor told him that as he lay and lurked among the trees, he saw a great company of orcs passing northwards, and wolves went with them, and among them was a man whose hands were chained, and they drove him onward with whips. Very tall he was, said Gwyndor, as tall as are the men from the misty hills of Hithlum. Then Beleg told him of his own errand in Tar Nufuin, and Gwyndor sought to dissuade him from this quest, saying that he would but join Turin in the anguish that awaited him. But Beleg would not abandon Turin. Does not deserve you, man. Despairing himself, he aroused hope again in Gwyndor's heart, and together they went on, following the orcs until they came out of the forest on the high slopes that ran down to the barren dunes of Anflaughlin. There, within sight of the peaks of Thangordrim, the orcs made their encampment in a bare dell as the light of day was failing, and setting wolf sentinels all about, they fell to carousing. A great storm rode up out of the west, and lightning glittered on the shadowy mountains far away, as Beleg and Gwyndor crept towards the dell. When all in the camp were sleeping, Beleg took his bow, and in the darkness shot the wolf sentinels one by one and silently. Then, in great peril, they entered in, and they found Turin fettered hand and foot and tied to a withered tree, and all about him knives that had been cast at him were embedded in the trunk, and he was senseless in a sleep of great weariness. But Beleg and Gwyndor cut the bonds that held him, and lifting him, they carried him out of the dell. Yet they could not bear him further than to a thicket of thorn trees a little way above. There they laid him down, and now the storm drew very near. Beleg drew his sword, Anglachel, and with it he cut the fetters that bound Turin. But fate was that day more strong, for the blade slipped as he cut the shackles, and Turin's foot was pricked. Then he was aroused into a sudden wakefulness of rage and fear, and seeing one bending over him with naked blade, he leapt up with a great cry, believing orcs were come again to torment him. And grappling with him in the darkness, he seized Anglichel and slew Beleg Cuthalion, thinking him a foe. But as he stood, finding himself free and ready to sell his life dearly against imagined foes, there came a great flash of lightning above them, and in its light he looked down on Beleg's face. Then Hurin stood stone still and silent, staring on that dreadful death, knowing what he had done. And so terrible was his face, lit by the lightning that flickered all about them, that Gwyndor cowered down upon the ground and dared not raise his eyes. But now in the dell beneath the orcs were aroused, and all the camp was in a tumult, for they feared the thunder that came out of the west, believing it was sent against them by the great enemies beyond the sea. Then a wind arose, and great rains fell, and torrents swept down from the heights of Tar Nifuin. And though Gwyndor cried out to Turin, warning him of their utmost peril, he made no answer, but sat unmoving and unweeping in the tempest, beside the body of Beleg Cuthalion. Poor guy. He deserved so much better. He goes out of his way to help this idiot so many times, and then he gets stabbed to death by the guy saving him. Turin's a dummy. He's just dumb. He really is. And poor Beleg. Poor Beleg deserved better. I think that's as far as we're going, because there is quite a bit more story. Actually, no, I should probably go... It's a good spot to stop. Yeah, I think we will stop there, just because I think it's the best story beat to stop at. The next part gets into, like, he's finally on board with the let's fight the orcs thing, you know? Took him long enough. So we'll continue that next week and finish the tale of Turin Turambar. With that, we'll almost be done with the Silmarillion. We'll have, like, 2 stories left, neither of which are as long as that one. There's the Akkalabeth, which is the downfall of Numenor, the city of Numenor. The Voyage of Arendil, which is pretty short. Tuor's story, and How Dariath Falls. And those chapters are pretty short, so we're getting there. We're almost done with this one. This was a nice story about idiots being the big dumb. Yeah. It's based on the story of Calervo. It's based on a myth that Tolkien liked. Let's see if I can spell this. Calervo, an ill-fated character in the Kalevala, the Finnish national epic. That's what it was. He's cursed, which, if you'll remember from last time, Morgoth cursed Hurin, who is Turin's father. And so the book, The Children of Hurin, goes further into depth about the fact that this curse has influenced both, the whole family, and all of them are gonna be in a lot of trouble. They're not gonna have happy lives. But anyway, thanks for joining me. I'll be back in a little bit. We're gonna do a longer game stream to go with our shorter book stream, because I'm gonna try and finish Silent Hill 3 tonight, so that'll be fun. Support the channel if you want to. All the links are in the description. Y'all know how it goes. And I will see you guys in a little bit. Bye.